Picture this, my dear listeners, ... The year is 1835, and London's foggy streets glisten under the soft glow of gas lamps. Can you smell the coal smoke mixing with the sweet scent of blooming roses? The Regency era is in full swing, and tonight, the most magnificent ballroom in Mayfair is about to witness something extraordinary. But wait, before we dive into this tale of unexpected love, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you simply didn't belong? Like everyone around you was speaking a language you couldn't quite understand? Well, buckle up, because tonight's heroine knows that feeling all too well. Her name is Cordelia Ashworth, and oh my goodness, where do I even begin with this delightful creature? Picture a young woman of 21, with the most glorious cascade of copper curls you've ever seen, each ringlet catching the candlelight like spun gold. Her face is dotted with the sweetest freckles, like someone scattered stardust across porcelain. But here's the thing that makes everyone whisper behind their fans. While other young ladies spent their mornings discussing the latest fashion from Paris, Cordelia could be found in her family's garden, completely absorbed in examining the pistils and stamens of her beloved roses. Can you imagine? While her peers debated silk versus satin, our dear Cordelia was memorizing the Latin names of every flower in Hampshire. "Mama," she would say, her green eyes sparkling with excitement, "did you know that the Rosa gallica can survive in almost any soil condition?" It's absolutely fascinating how the root system adapts to... "Cordelia, please?" her mother would interrupt, fanning herself dramatically. Lady Pemberton doesn't want to hear about root systems during afternoon tea. Poor Mrs. Ashworth. Can you imagine having a daughter who preferred botanical illustrations to fashion plates? The woman nearly had vapors every time Cordelia opened her mouth at social gatherings. But here's what made our heroine truly special. She wasn't just different. She was authentically, beautifully herself. In a world where young ladies were expected to be ornamental, Cordelia was substantial. She had depth, intelligence, and a heart as tender as the petals she so adored. The problem? Society didn't quite know what to do with her. Now, as fate would have it, Cordelia's coming out season arrived like an unwelcome storm. Can you picture her standing in her bedroom, staring at the elaborate ball gowns her mother had commissioned? While other girls her age were practically vibrating with excitement about their debut, our sweet Cordelia felt like she was preparing for battle. "I don't understand why I must parade around like a prize mare," she confided to her lady's maid, Sarah, who was the only person who truly understood her. "Miss Cordelia," Sarah said gently while arranging those gorgeous copper curls, "perhaps you'll find someone who appreciates your unique qualities. But who on earth would that be?" In a world where young ladies were expected to flutter their fans and giggle at every gentleman's jest, Cordelia's earnest discussions about photosynthesis weren't exactly what you'd call fashionable. Now, let me tell you about the most eligible bachelor in all of London, and possibly the most mysterious. Duke Kyung-woo Park. Yes, you heard that correctly. A Korean duke in Regency London? Now that's something you don't see every day. Is it? His story was quite remarkable, actually. His grandfather had been a brilliant merchant who'd established unprecedented trade routes between Asia and Europe. Through shrewd business dealings and an absolutely impeccable reputation, the Park family had earned their place among British nobility. And Kyung-woo? He was the crown jewel of the family. Educated at Oxford, fluent in 5 languages, and possessing a business mind that could make grown men weep with envy. At 28, he was what every mama in London considered the ultimate catch. Tall, impeccably dressed with those striking dark eyes that seemed to see right through all the social pretenses. His black hair was always perfectly styled, and when he walked into a room, Well, let's just say conversations stopped. But here's the delicious irony. While every eligible young lady in London was practically throwing themselves at his feet, the Duke found himself thoroughly unimpressed by the entire spectacle. Another season, another parade of empty-headed beauties, he confided to his closest friend, Lord Pemberton, as they surveyed the ballroom from the balcony. Tell me, Charles, when did intelligence become so unfashionable among young ladies? Come now, Kyung-woo, Charles chuckled. Surely you're being too harsh. Miss Weatherby is quite accomplished at the pianoforte. The Duke raised one perfectly arched eyebrow. Yes, but can she hold a conversation about anything more substantial than the weather or her needlework? You see, our Duke had a problem. His family expected him to marry, and marry well. The Park family businesses needed the stability that came with the right alliance. But Kyung-woo wasn't interested in a decorative wife who would simper and agree with everything he said. He wanted a partner, a friend, someone who could challenge his mind and share his burdens. Was that really too much to ask? And so we arrive at that magical night, the Pemberton Ball, the social event of the season. Can you picture it? Crystal chandeliers casting rainbow prisms across the marble floor, hundreds of candles flickering like captured stars, and the cream of London society dressed in their absolute finest. The ballroom buzzed with excitement. Every eligible young lady had spent hours preparing for this moment, the chance to catch the Duke's eye. Silk gowns rustled, jewels sparkled, and the air practically vibrated with matrimonial ambitions. But where was our dear Cordelia in all this splendor? If you guessed, hiding behind a potted palm, trying to avoid conversation, you'd be absolutely correct. Poor thing stood there in a beautiful emerald gown that brought out her eyes wonderfully, but she looked about as comfortable as a hothouse orchid in a snowstorm. Every time someone approached her, she seemed to shrink further into herself. Miss Ashworth! Lady Pemberton's voice cut through the crowd like a sword. Come, dear, I must introduce you to Lord Fitzwilliam. He's quite interested in ... nature walks. Cordelia's eyes went wide with panic. Lord! Fitzwilliam was notorious for his wandering hands and his complete lack of interest in anything that didn't involve hunting or drinking. A nature walk with him would be about as educational as a conversation with a doorknob. Oh, I was just admiring this lovely ... She gestured helplessly at the decorative firm beside her. Aspidistra elation, came a smooth, unexpected voice from behind her. Also known as the cast iron plant, prized for its ability to survive in low-light conditions, Cordelia spun around, and there he was. The Duke himself, looking devastatingly handsome in his perfectly tailored black evening wear, offering her the smallest hint of a conspiratorial smile. Your Grace! Lady Pemberton practically squeaked with delight. How wonderful! I was just about to introduce you to Miss Cordelia Ashworth. Miss Ashworth, may I present His Grace, the Duke of Park. Now, here's where things get interesting, my dear listeners. Instead of the usual polite pleasantries about the weather or the lovely decorations, do you know what the Duke said? I couldn't help but notice, Miss Ashworth, that you seem to be the only person at this ball who's actually paying attention to the botanical arrangements. Most impressive specimens, don't you think? Though I suspect they're struggling a bit in this heat. Cordelia's mouth fell open slightly. Had someone actually just spoken to her about plants at a ball? She blinked those lovely green eyes, certain she must be dreaming. You know about plants, Your Grace? I know many things, Miss Ashworth. My family's trading businesses have given me occasion to study flora from around the world, though I confess I'm far more interested in their commercial applications than their ... Shall we say more romantic qualities? Was he teasing her? There was definitely a twinkle in those dark eyes. Just then, the orchestra struck up a waltz, and couples began moving toward the dance floor. Cordelia instinctively took a step back. She'd been dreading this moment all evening. Dancing meant being the center of attention, making conversation, pretending to be someone she wasn't. But the Duke, perceptive as he was, noticed her distress immediately. "Miss Ashworth," he said, extending his hand with the utmost courtesy, "would you do me the honor? I promise to keep our conversation strictly botanical if that would make you more comfortable." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Here was this magnificent, powerful man, the most sought-after bachelor in London, offering to talk about her beloved plants just to put her at ease. She placed her gloved hand in his, and oh my goodness, the moment their eyes met as he led her to the dance floor. Can you feel that electric spark? The entire ballroom seemed to fade away as they began to move together. "You're trembling," he observed gently as they swayed to the music. "Are you quite all right?" "I'm not." I don't usually ... Cordelia struggled to find words. How could she explain that she felt like a fish out of water? That every other young lady here seemed to possess some secret knowledge about how to be charming and witty that had somehow bypassed her entirely? "You don't usually enjoy balls," he finished for her, his voice understanding rather than judgmental. "Neither do I, if I'm being honest." "You don't?" She looked up at him in surprise. "But you're the Duke. Everyone here is hoping to catch your attention." A shadow passed across his handsome features. "Precisely the problem, Miss Ashworth. It's rather difficult to have a genuine conversation when half the people in the room are calculating your net worth while the other half are planning your wedding." Despite herself, Cordelia let out a small laugh. "That does sound rather overwhelming." "Indeed. Now tell me about your gardens. I noticed you mentioned having a particular fondness for roses." As they danced, Cordelia found herself relaxing for the first time all evening. The Duke was an excellent dancer, strong, confident, but not overwhelming. And more importantly, he seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. "The Rosa Damascena is my absolute favorite," she was saying, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "The scent is simply divine, and the petals can be used for so many purposes: rosewater, potpourri, even medicinal preparations." But even as she spoke, Cordelia became increasingly aware of the whispers around them. Other young ladies were staring, some with envy, others with barely concealed malice. The attention was making her skin crawl. The Duke, ever observant, noticed her growing discomfort immediately. "Miss Ashworth," he said quietly as the music began to wind down, "you look rather pale. Perhaps some fresh air would do you good?" Without waiting for her response, he smoothly guided her off the dance floor and toward the French doors that led to the Pembertons' famous rose garden. The relief Cordelia felt as they stepped out into the cool night air was palpable. "Better?" he asked, offering her his arm as they walked along the moonlit paths. "Much," she breathed, then caught herself. "Oh, but Your Grace, you shouldn't be out here with me unchaperoned. People will talk." "Let them," he said with a dismissive wave. "I find I care very little for what people think. Besides, we're hardly alone. Half the ballroom can see us through those windows." They strolled in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the orchestra drifting out behind them. Cordelia found herself stealing glances at her companion, still hardly believing this was happening. "May I ask you something, Miss Ashworth?" the Duke said eventually. "Of course, Your Grace. Why do you look so surprised when someone shows interest in your botanical knowledge?" "It's clearly a passion of yours." And you speak about it with such intelligence and enthusiasm. Cordelia felt heat rise in her cheeks. How could she explain without sounding pathetic? It's just ... Well, most people find my interests rather ... My mother despairs of me completely. She says no gentleman wants to hear about soil composition and pruning techniques when he's trying to court a lady. The Duke stopped walking and turned to face her fully. In the moonlight, his expression was serious, almost intense. Miss Ashworth, may I speak plainly? She nodded, her heart suddenly racing. Your mother is wrong. Any gentleman who doesn't appreciate your intelligence, your passion, your authenticity, well, he doesn't deserve you. And furthermore, he added, his voice softening, he'd be missing out on knowing someone truly extraordinary. From that night forward, everything changed. The Duke began calling on Cordelia regularly, much to her mother's barely contained hysteria and the absolute shock of London society. Can you imagine the gossip? The most eligible bachelor in England choosing to court the peculiar Ashworth girl who talked about flowers instead of fashion. But, oh, how they suited each other. While other suitors had glazed over when Cordelia mentioned her botanical experiments, Kyung-woo asked thoughtful questions. He wanted to know about her propagation techniques, her theories on soil improvement, her plans for expanding the family gardens. You know, he said one afternoon as they walked through Hyde Park, I've been thinking about what you said regarding companion planting. There might be applications for some of my family's agricultural investments. Really? Cordelia's eyes sparkled with excitement. Oh, that's wonderful. You see, if you plant certain species together, they can actually help each other thrive. It's all about understanding which plants complement each other's needs. Rather like people, don't you think? He said, giving her a meaningful look that made her heart flutter. And what about our Duke? Well, for the first time in his life, he found himself looking forward to social calls. Cordelia's genuine nature was like a breath of fresh air after years of calculated conversations and strategic flirtation. She asked about his businesses with real curiosity, wanted to understand the complexities of international trade, and even offered insights that made him see his own work in new ways. You know, she said one day as they sat in her family's drawing room, your description of building trust with trading partners sounds rather like cultivating a garden. You need patience, consistent care, and you must understand what each relationship needs to flourish. Kyung-woo stared at her for a long moment, then broke into the most genuine smile she'd ever seen. Miss Ashworth, has anyone ever told you that you have a remarkable mind? Actually, she said with a shy laugh, you're the first. As the weeks passed, their friendship deepened into something neither had expected, a true meeting of minds and hearts. Kyung-woo found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone. His struggles with the expectations placed upon him as the family heir. His loneliness despite being surrounded by admirers. His dreams of expanding the family businesses while maintaining their reputation for integrity. Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life, he confided one evening as they sat in the Ashworth's garden, surrounded by Cordelia's beloved roses. Everyone sees the title, the wealth, the position. But what I really want is, well, this. Cordelia asked softly. A real conversation with someone who sees me as more than a strategic alliance. Someone who cares about what I think, not just what I can provide. Cordelia felt her heart squeeze painfully. How could someone so accomplished, so admired, feel so alone? I understand, she said quietly. I've always felt like I was disappointing everyone simply by being myself. As if my very nature was somehow ... wrong. Never, Kyung-woo said with surprising vehemence. Cordelia, you must never think that. Your nature is perfect. You're genuine in a world full of pretense. Intelligent in a society that prizes beauty over brains. Kind in a place that rewards cruelty. The use of her first name sent a shiver through her. When had they moved beyond formal address? And why did hearing her name and his voice make her feel so wonderfully warm? But as we all know, my dear listeners, true love never runs smooth, does it? The trouble began, as it often does, with jealousy and malicious gossip. Miss Lavinia Worthington, widely considered the most beautiful debutante of the season, had been absolutely certain that the Duke would offer for her. After all, she had everything: beauty, connections, a substantial dowry, and absolutely no disturbing interests in anything intellectual. When it became clear that the Duke preferred Cordelia's company, Lavinia's perfectly composed facade began to crack. "I simply don't understand it," she confided to her little circle of followers at Lady Ashford's tea party. What could he possibly see in that strange Ashworth girl? All she does is prattle on about plants like some sort of governess. Perhaps, suggested Miss Penelope Hartwell with false sweetness, he finds her amusing. You know how gentlemen sometimes enjoy the novelty of an oddity. The words cut deep, and they were meant to. But worse was to come. Lady Worthington, Lavinia's mother, was not a woman to accept defeat gracefully. If her daughter couldn't have the Duke through charm, perhaps other methods would prove more effective. She began spreading whispers. Subtle at first. Questions about Cordelia's suitability, hints about her family's financial situation, suggestions that the Duke was merely being kind to an unfortunate wallflower. Such a charitable man, the Duke, Lady Worthington would say with a patronizing smile. Though one does wonder how long his patience will last with that peculiar girl's botanical obsessions. The situation came to a head at the Middletons' garden party, ironically enough. Cordelia had been invited to display some of her prized roses, an honor that had filled her with pride and excitement. She'd spent weeks preparing, selecting her most beautiful specimens, writing careful notes about each variety. The Duke, of course, was there to support her, and watching his face as she explained her cultivation methods to the assembled guests filled Cordelia with such happiness she could barely contain it. But Lavinia and her mother had other plans. "How educational," Lavinia said loudly enough for everyone to hear as Cordelia finished describing her grafting techniques. "Though I must say, Miss Ashworth, such detailed knowledge of plant reproduction seems rather inappropriate for an unmarried lady, don't you think?" The implication was clear and absolutely scandalous. Several ladies gasped, and Cordelia's face went scarlet. "I beg your pardon?" she managed to say. "Oh, nothing improper, I'm sure," Lavinia continued with false innocence. "It's just that such intimate knowledge of botanical processes. Well, one wonders where a sheltered young lady would acquire such information." The Duke stepped forward immediately, his face dark with anger, but Lavinia wasn't finished. "Of course, spending so much time alone in gardens, reading such scientific texts without proper supervision. Well, one can't help but wonder what else Miss Ashworth might have learned." The assembled crowd was riveted. Here was scandal of the highest order, an accusation that Cordelia's botanical interests were somehow indicative of improper knowledge or behavior. Cordelia felt the world spinning around her. She could see the expressions on the faces surrounding her: shock, curiosity, judgment. Her life's passion, her innocent joy in learning, was being twisted into something sordid and shameful. Without a word, she turned and fled, tears streaming down her face. What happened next, my dear listeners, was the stuff of legend. The Duke watched Cordelia disappear into the house, then slowly turned to face the assembled guest. His expression was calm, but there was something in his eyes that made even the boldest soul take a step back. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent garden, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding." He walked to where Cordelia's roses were displayed, picking up one of her carefully written cards. "Miss Ashworth's knowledge of botany comes from years of dedicated study, countless hours spent in research, and a natural intelligence that would shame most of the gentlemen at Oxford. Her understanding of plant cultivation has practical applications that could benefit agriculture across the empire." His gaze swept the crowd, lingering pointedly on Lavinia and her mother. "What I find truly improper," he continued, his tone growing colder, "is the suggestion that a woman's intelligence and education are somehow scandalous. That learning itself is shameful. That knowledge, honestly acquired through study and observation, could be twisted into something inappropriate." Lady Worthington opened her mouth to speak, but the Duke's raised hand silenced her. "I have spent considerable time in Miss Ashworth's company," he said clearly. "I have found her to be a woman of impeccable character, remarkable intelligence, and genuine kindness. Any suggestion to the contrary is not only false, but reveals more about the character of those making such suggestions than about Miss Ashworth herself." The Duke's declaration sent shockwaves through London society. Here was the most eligible bachelor in England, publicly defending Cordelia Ashworth and, by implication, declaring his serious intentions toward her. But the Duke wasn't finished. Oh no, my dear listeners, he was just getting started. He excused himself from the garden party and went immediately to find Cordelia, who had taken refuge in the Middletons' library, sobbing quietly among the books. He said softly from the doorway. She looked up with red-rimmed eyes, and the sight nearly broke his heart. "Please, your grace," she said, trying to compose herself. "You needn't. That is, I understand if you no longer wish to. I mean, after what was said, ... After what was said," he interrupted, entering the room and closing the door behind him. "Propriety be damned. I find myself more certain than ever of what I want to say to you." He crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Cordelia, look at me." Reluctantly, she met his eyes. "What happened out there was despicable, cruel, and it had absolutely nothing to do with you and everything to do with jealousy and small-minded thinking. But the things she said, ... about my interests being improper ... are nonsense," he said firmly. "Your intelligence is not improper. Your passion for learning is not shameful. Your knowledge is not scandalous. You are not too much or too different or too anything. You are perfect exactly as you are." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different tears entirely. "How can you say that? I'm nothing like the other ladies you could choose from. I can't make witty conversation about fashion or politics. I know how to flutter my fan or simper and giggle. All I know about is plants and books and quiet gardens." Kyung-woo cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Cordelia, don't you understand? That's exactly why I choose you. Because you're not like the others. Because when you talk about something you love, your whole face lights up with passion and intelligence. Because you see beauty in things others overlook. Because you have depth and substance and authenticity in a world full of shallow pretense." His voice grew husky with emotion. "I don't want a wife who agrees with everything I say. I want a partner who challenges me, who makes me think, who brings her own dreams and passions to our life together. I don't want someone who disappears into the background of my life. I want someone who becomes the center of it." "Cordelia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I am completely, utterly, desperately in love with you." Not despite your differences, but because of them. Not in spite of your passion for botany, but because seeing you pursue something you love with such dedication and intelligence makes me admire you more than any perfectly executed curtsy or practiced flirtation ever could." She stared at him in wonder, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You love me?" "More than I thought it was possible to love anyone," he said, his dark eyes intense with sincerity. "I love your curious mind and your gentle heart. I love the way you get excited when you discover a new species. I love that you care more about understanding the world around you than impressing people with empty accomplishments." He took a shaky breath. "I love that you're brave enough to be yourself in a world that demands conformity. I love your compassion, your authenticity, your beautiful, brilliant, wonderful soul." "Oh, Kyungwoo," she whispered, using his name for the first time. "Say it again," he breathed. "I love you too," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I love your kindness and your integrity. I love how you listen to me, really listen as if what I have to say matters. I love your intelligence and your gentleness and the way you make me feel like I'm not strange or wrong for being who I am." And then, my dear listeners, came the moment we've all been waiting for. In that quiet library, surrounded by books and afternoon sunlight, the Duke of Park and Miss Cordelia Ashworth shared their first kiss. It was soft at first, tentative, like the brush of butterfly wings. But as Cordelia's arms came up to circle his neck and she pressed closer to him, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of passion and promise and forever. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Marry me," he whispered against her lips. "Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life showing you how extraordinary you are." "Yes," she breathed, her green eyes shining with joy. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They kissed again, and in that moment, all the pain and rejection and loneliness of Cordelia's past melted away. She was loved, cherished, chosen, not despite who she was, but because of it. Their wedding 3 months later was the event of the season. Cordelia walked down the aisle of St. George's, Hanover Square, on her father's arm, radiant in ivory silk and her grandmother's pearls, carrying a bouquet of her own prized roses. The Duke waited at the altar looking devastatingly handsome and completely besotted. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through all the seasons of their lives, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. Even Lady Worthington had to dab at her eyes with her handkerchief, though she'd never admit it. But the most beautiful moment came during the reception, when the Duke stood to give his speech. "My friends," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, "I stand before you today as the luckiest man in England. Not because I've married the most conventionally beautiful woman, or the most fashionable, or the one with the largest dowry." He turned to smile at his new wife, who was glowing with happiness. "I'm the luckiest man alive because I've married the most authentic woman I've ever known. A woman who taught me that true beauty comes from passion and intelligence and kindness. A woman who showed me that the best conversations happen not in ballrooms, but in quiet gardens. A woman who chose to be herself in a world that rewards conformity, and who taught me to do the same." The guests erupted in applause, and Cordelia felt her heart might burst with happiness 5 years later. The Duke and Duchess of Park were known throughout England for their remarkable partnership. Their estate boasted the most magnificent botanical gardens in the country, with specimens from around the world carefully cultivated by the Duchess herself. The Duke's trading empire had expanded exponentially, thanks in part to his wife's insights into agricultural applications of botanical science. But more than that, they were known for their genuine happiness. Visitors to Park House always remarked on the way the Duke and Duchess looked at each other, the easy affection between them, The sense that they were not just husband and wife, but true partners and dearest friends. They had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, all of whom inherited their mother's curiosity about the natural world and their father's business acumen. The Duke could often be found in the nursery, teaching his eldest daughter about international trade while she showed him her pressed flower collection. And Cordelia? She became one of the most respected botanists of her generation, publishing papers on plant cultivation that were read throughout Europe. Her greenhouse was a wonder of scientific innovation, and scholars traveled from across the continent to learn from her methods. But her asterisk? Greatest joy remained the same as it had always been, the quiet moments in her garden, now shared with the man who had chosen her not despite her differences, but because of them. So what can we learn from Cordelia and Kyung-woo's story, my dear listeners? Perhaps it's this, that there is someone out there who will love you not in spite of what makes you different, but because of it. Someone who will see your quirks as charms, your passions as attractive rather than odd, your authenticity as beautiful rather than strange. In a world that often tries to make us all the same, the greatest act of courage is remaining true to who you are. Because somewhere out there is someone who is looking for exactly what you have to offer. Someone who will choose your genuine heart over a dozen perfect facades. Cordelia thought she was too different for love. The Duke thought he was too particular to find a true partner. Both discovered that when 2 authentic souls recognize each other, the result is not compromise, but completion. Love doesn't ask us to become someone else. True love sees us exactly as we are and says, yes, this is what I've been waiting for. And perhaps most importantly, the story reminds us that the very things we're told make us difficult or unmarketable or too much might just be the things that make us perfectly suited for the right person. After all, in a ballroom full of conventional beauties, it was the peculiar girl with dirt under her fingernails and flowers in her hair who captured the heart of the most softer Duke in London. Sometimes being different isn't a disadvantage at all. Sometimes it's your greatest strength. And there you have it, my lovely listeners. Another tale of unexpected love triumphing over society's narrow expectations. Did Cordelia and Kyung-woo's story make your heart flutter? Did you find yourself believing in the power of authentic love? If this story touched your heart, please show some love by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more swoon-worthy romance tales. Drop a comment below and tell us what makes you different and how has it turned out to be your strength. I love hearing from you all. And don't forget to share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that they are perfectly lovable exactly as they are. After all, we could all use a little more romance and a little more acceptance in our lives, couldn't we? Until next time, keep believing in love, keep being authentically you, and remember, your perfect match might be closer than you'll think.